Did you know that once upon a time, Israel attacked its strongest and closest ally, the United States? And they did it on purpose. I know you've probably never heard about it, but I'm not kidding. This wasn't an accident, misfortune, or even a conspiracy. It was much worse. Israel actually conducted an aerial and sea attack on an unarmed US Navy vessel, the U.S.S. Liberty, killing 34 Americans and injuring more than 170. Welcome back to the show. In today's episode, we see how Israel got away with murder, and not for the first time. Picture this. It was a sunny summer day on June 8, 1967. The US wasn't having a good year. Racial discrimination and poverty had sparked riots all over the country. The Vietnam War was raging and 10,000 US soldiers died that year alone. It was also the height of the Cold War, and US President Lyndon Johnson found himself close to a conflict in the Middle East. Israel had surprised the world and its Arab neighbors when it attacked Egypt on June 5, 1967, starting what became a massive land grab. To give you some context here, Arab powers like Egypt and Syria were backed by the Soviet Union, while Israel was backed by the US and allied powers. Back to that sunny day on June 8, the U.S.S. Liberty, a state-of-the-art US intelligence gathering vessel, was sailing across Mediterranean waters and into the war zone. The spy ship was in international waters, off the Egyptian coast in Sinai. Exclusive interviews obtained by Al Jazeera revealed the shocking details of the entire incident.
Our primary purpose was to intercept communications of the Russian spy aircraft as it were at Alexandria, Egypt, and that was our job, was to find them. We were not targeted against the Israelis.
At this point, the 1967 war had just 2 days left. Sinai, East Jerusalem, and Gaza had been seized, Jordan and Egypt had been defeated, and only Syria was holding out. The U.S.S. Liberty survivors all claimed that they couldn't hear anything from the Egyptian side.
The airwaves were dead. The only voices we did get were those of Israeli or Hebrew, was what we were hearing.
Israel owned the land and skies, and the Americans had been identified by their allies.
I was listening to the chatter the night before. They knew it was an American ship that came into the area. They knew who we were.
All morning on June 8th, an Israeli reconnaissance aircraft flew over the Liberty, knowing that it was an American vessel.
They were slowly lumbering over our ship, and we were waving at them, they were waving at us. And I felt that we were in great shape because they knew who we were.
They're our friends. We felt safe. Actually, it was a secure feeling to see them.
The Liberty was actually the only sizable vessel in the area that day. The ship even boasted a massive American flag that could be seen from miles away. The last thing that anyone expected was an attack.
Sun was shining, blue sky, clouds, nice, people sunbathing on the deck. We had lunch, and 5 minutes later, maybe, here came the jets, and nobody really knew what was happening until they started firing.
Israeli military jets started opening fire at the Liberty. Surviving crew members recount how the Israelis fired rockets at the ship and jammed the signals so the crew couldn't request help, and then proceeded to drop napalm on the unarmed crew. And to top it all off, the Israeli Navy machine gunned life rafts that the US Marines were using to escape death and get the injured away to safety. They then proceeded to torpedo the vessel in hopes of sinking it. The dog had bitten off the hand that feeds him. And so you might be wondering now what the US did about all of this. Surely they held the Israeli government to account, retaliated in some way, diplomatically, politically, economically, something. Well, no. The US did pretty much nothing to honor its victims, and the whole thing was covered up, which is probably the reason why you've never heard about the incident in the first place. Washington's first priority was to handle the media. They made sure no journalists could get access to the crew members or their families.
When they took the severely wounded to various parts, they actually posted guards on their rooms so that no one could be interviewed by the press. The total press blackout was in effect.
My husband was killed on the Liberty. And by the time I got there, there were any number of people from the National Security Agency there. They were there to make sure that I didn't speak to anyone from the press, and I didn't. They stayed night and day.
Despite the media cover-up, Lyndon Johnson was still facing a crisis. He spoke to Newsweek off the record about the incident, but then Tel Aviv got to work.
The Israeli embassy regarded this as a major problem, and that what Johnson had told Newsweek practically amounted to blood libel.
Alleging that he's blood libeling is going to arouse the Jewish donors.
Basically, threats of painting him as anti-Israel in the hopes of derailing his political funding. But Tel Aviv also dangled some carrots and offered up a few favors to buy his silence. At the time, Johnson was facing huge public pressure on the Vietnam War. Prominent Jewish leaders in the US, who were typically vocal in their criticism of the war, turned silent and stopped the Johnson bashing.
Leaders in the Jewish community were opposing him on Vietnam, and they were suddenly becoming more silent on Vietnam as the Liberty Crisis moved.
And more concretely, Israel provided the US with samples of Soviet-made surface-to-air missiles that were giving them grief in Vietnam. So, to save face, an official inquiry was launched. The report was written in 20 days. It did not include many testimonies of the crew on board, no interviews with Israelis, and even the recording of Israelis identifying the ship as American were buried. 168 bags of American body parts were incinerated, and the cherry on the cake? The report exonerated Israel from any blame. And Tel Aviv danced to the beat, claiming it was a misunderstanding, a mistake, that no one was to blame. The cover-up was so bad that Johnson broke the long-standing American tradition of the president handing medals to veterans on national television. He avoided this duty to shun media attention and avoid meeting the Liberty survivors, and instead stayed in the White House to give high school students their diplomas. In the following year, American aid to Israel increased fourfold, and Johnson signed a classified treaty with Israel for the mutual exchange of intelligence, an agreement that is still in place. Yeah, it's all pretty hard to believe. Have stranger things happened?
In the early 1960s, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Ella Lemonser, concocted a plan for false flag operations as a pretext to invade Cuba and for war with the Soviet Union. In Operation Northwoods, they planned to hijack jets by remote control, crash them, and blame the attack on Cuba. There were many other terrorist attacks they planned to carry out that were contained within the document. One scenario mentioned was the destruction of a U.S. naval vessel that was to be blamed on a foreign power as a pretext for war with any enemy they picked. President Lyndon Baines Johnson went operational with Northwoods on June 8, 1967 during the Six-Day War. During the Six-Day War between Israel and the Arab nations, the U.S.S. Liberty was sent by Johnson to collect electronic intelligence in the eastern Mediterranean. The clearly marked U.S. intelligence ship was 14 miles off the coast of Israel in international waters.
A short time after the air attack had been completed, the 3 torpedo boats approached us from our starboard quarter at high speed and in an apparent torpedo launch attitude.
Israeli surveillance aircraft flew low over the ship and clearly identified it as an American vessel. At 2 p.m. that afternoon, the U.S.S. Liberty was attacked by 3 Mirage 3 fighter bombers. From the onset of the attack, the fighter bombers were jamming U.S. signals. Not only were they jamming U.S. signals specifically, they were also unmarked, the only unmarked aircraft in Israel's arsenal. The fighter bombers strafed the ships with their cannons, dropped conventional munitions and napalm on the ship, repeatedly from stem to stern. After the Mirages had done their work, the ship was hit by medium bomber Dassault missiles carrying napalm and other munitions like white phosphorus. The U.S.S. Liberty was then attacked by 3 Israeli torpedo boats bearing Israeli flags. The torpedo gunboats opened fire with high-caliber machine guns and launched torpedoes. A single torpedo struck the ship, blowing a hole in both sides, entering the ship and leaving a 30-foot exit hole when it exploded. Then the torpedo boats began strafing life rafts in the water, an international war crime. While all of this was happening, the oversized American flag flew clearly above the ship. The attack on the Liberty went on for hour after hour after hour. During the entire attack, the U.S.S. Liberty continually called the 6th Fleet that was nearby, begging for air support or rescue. 2 aircraft carriers in the Med responded by launching fighter aircraft. Unbelievably, they were recalled by the White House. Rear Admiral Geist, then commanding the carriers in the 6th Fleet, called Washington personally to confirm the recall order. Secretary of Defense McNamara came on the line, and then President Johnson himself told Geis, "I want that goddamn ship going to the bottom. No help. Recall the wings." Imagine being Admiral Geis begging the president to allow you to defend an American ship that's under attack and being told by him that he wants the ship going to the bottom. Despite the fact that the U.S. carriers withdrew their help, a Russian spy ship appeared and witnessed part of the attack. After 3 hours into the attack, the Israelis withdrew because there were witnesses, allowing the damaged U.S.S. Liberty to limp to safety. 40 years after the attack on the U.S.S. Liberty, we know exactly what happened. I've interviewed former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Thomas Moore. I've interviewed the admirals that were on the line who heard what President Johnson said. I've even talked to the head JAG officer of the Navy who was ordered to falsify the reports and cover up what had really happened. One of the Israeli pilots has gone public as well, saying that 3 times he refused over his radio to headquarters to attack the ship, saying clearly that it was an American ship in international waters and an ally. He was ordered under threat of court-martial to engage the ship. In a nutshell, this is what happened. President Johnson had personal control over the ship, parked it in the Mediterranean, made a backroom deal with Israel to attack it with an order to kill all aboard. Then the attack on the ship was to be blamed on Egypt. The U.S. would enter the war and take over the entire Middle East. In the aftermath of the attack on the most highly decorated ship in U.S. history, the captain and his entire crew were told they would spend life in prison or be killed if they told anyone what happened. Captain William L. McGonigal was given the Congressional Medal of Honor in secret and told not to tell anyone that he had won the award.
We look back now at a largely forgotten aspect of Bush's war in Iraq, the vast domestic propaganda campaign that occurred in the United States before the invasion began. The story centers on a young Kuwaiti woman named Nayira. On October 10, 1990, the 15-year-old girl gave riveting testimony before Congress about the horrors inside Kuwait after Iraq invaded.
My sister, with my 5-day-old nephew, traveled across the desert to safety. There was no milk available for the baby in Kuwait. They barely escaped when their car was stuck in the desert sand, and help came from Saudi Arabia. I stayed behind and wanted to do something for my country. The second week after an invasion, I volunteered at the Al-Adan hospital with 12 other women who wanted to help as well. I was the youngest volunteer. The other women were from 20 to 30 years old. While I was there, I saw the Iraqi soldiers come into the hospital with guns. They took the babies out of the incubators, and left the children to die on the cold floor. It was horrifying. I could not help but think of my nephew.
Nayira's testimony was rebroadcast across the country and marked a turning point in public opinion on going to war. President George H.W. Bush repeatedly cited her claims.
They had kids in incubators, and they were thrown out of the incubators so that Kuwait could be systematically dismantled.
3 months after Nayira testified, President George H.W. Bush launched the invasion of Iraq. But it turned out Nayira's claims weren't true. No human rights group or news outlet could confirm what she said. It also turned out Nayira was not just any Kuwaiti teenager. She was the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador to the United States, Saad Nasir al-Sabah. She had been coached by the public relations firm Hill & Knowlton, which was working for the Kuwaiti government.
Hello. Hola, Carlos.
It's like geopolitical deja vu. It's Groundhog Day, boys with AIDS. I've heard this story before. 40 dead babies, beheaded dead babies. It was bullshit the first time I heard it, and I am praying to God it's bullshit the second time I heard it. But every time you hear about dead babies, it ends up with America being dragged into another Middle Eastern war where we dump in billions and billions and trillions of dollars and foment more craziness in this shithole part of the planet that I don't want anything to do with. Not my taxpayer dollars, not my service members, listen, Israel needs to fight its own battles. Palestine needs to fight its own battles. Listen, get us the fuck out of here. You are watching a rapid escalation in the establishment, the regime, a lot of the talking heads fomenting and whipping up more and more and more destruction in an Arab area of the world. After these same exact people let a whole bunch of Arabs into Western civilization. If you don't see what the plan is here, you're a fucking moron and you're going to get got. You're going to get dead. That's what you're going to get. This is all a part of a larger plan to send all of these Arabs into Western civilization as essentially sleeper cells. Oh, the refugees and their asylees, just let them in. Oh, they're escaping. Okay, now the establishment wants to go blow the fuck out of one of their areas. Okay, well, I imagine all of these Palestinians in New York, in Portland, in Oakland, in San Francisco, in Washington, D.C., I'm sure they're going to be fine with this. The ones in Germany, they're going to be fine. No. They're going to pop off in Western civilization. That's the point. That's the point of all of this. And so when I see Meghan McCain and all of the usual shitbag monsters telling me, well, you got to pick a side. I don't pick a side. Between Israel and Palestine, between Jews and Arabs, I ain't picking a side. Because I ain't got no fucking dog in that fight. Nope, sorry. Sorry that I'm not sorry. I don't give a fuck. Nope. I care that we're about to see monstrous terrorist attacks in this country. So if this is even real, if 40 dead beheaded babies is even real, that's going to happen in New York. It's going to happen in Seattle. I think we should be prepared for that. I think we should be locking down our border. I think that we should be investigating who the fuck we let in this country over the last 10, 20 years. All these fucking morons are all parading with all these Democrats, socialists. You're going to be the first to be killed by these people, by the way. They hate you and you're disarmed. You're fucked. So this is a big old fucking trap. I hope, again, that this story is fake. I hope it's false. A lot of crazy shit happened in Israel the other day. Yeah. These fucking terrorists did a bunch of crazy shit in Israel. Okay, well, that's Israel, though. That's on the other side of the planet. I care about Oakland. I care about San Francisco. I care about this area that's been fucking just completely infiltrated, invaded. This is a New York Post. Israel-Hamas war live updates. Hamas kills 40 babies and small children at single kibbutz. And they're saying that they were beheaded. All right. This seems like every aspect of what's going on in Israel right now seems just like the Ukrainian bullshit TikTok war, right? Where you don't see any footage, like everything's fake, everything's Call of Duty footage or Arma footage, and it's all TikTok footage, and it's all Ukrainian frontline TikTok dancers, and it's a war being fought on social media to gin up a reaction to send trillions of dollars into these wars, and the military-industrial complex is masturbating to this. And everybody's arguing about it online. I'm sitting there going, that's the rave in the desert that was attacked, the women being carried off, the women, like all of this is all playing out on social media. I think all of that happened. I think that those women were killed. I think that rave was attacked. I think that was let to be attacked. Egypt is now saying that they warned Israel 10 days before all of this. And you can see the machine moving. They're trying to push us into, well, you got to pick, you got to be pro-Israel, or you're pro-baby killer. I'm pro, leave me the fuck alone. How about that? I'm pro, leave me the fuck alone. Because that war is coming here. That war is coming here, and I think we should be ready, prepared in this country, in this area, for what these lizard people have done all across the planet. It's coming here. So, I don't want to send any... why would I want to... I don't want to send money to Ukraine. I don't want to send weapons to Ukraine. I don't want to send money or weapons to Israel. I want to send it here. I want to seal up my border. I want to make sure that my places aren't going to be destroyed, but they're going to be destroyed. If you're in a Democrat-run shithole, I would keep my fucking head on a swivel. All right, guys, thank you so much for... What the hell was that? It's otters or some shit, boys. Thanks so much for supporting the channel. If you want to be kept up to date on this warfare that's breaking out, hit that subscribe button and make way, because the salt must flow.
I frankly think that crisis initiation is really tough. And it's very hard for me to see how the United States president can get us to war with Iran. Which leads me to conclude that if, in fact, compromise is not coming, that the traditional way of America gets to war is what would be best for U.S. interests. Some people might think that Mr. Roosevelt wanted to get us into World War II, as David mentioned. You may recall we had to wait for Pearl Harbor. Some people might think Mr. Wilson wanted to get us into World War I. You may recall he had to wait for the Lusitania episode. Some people might think that Mr. Johnson wanted to send troops to Vietnam. You may recall we had to wait for the Gulf of Tonkin episode. We didn't go to war with Spain until the U.S.S. Until the Maine exploded. And may I point out that Mr. Lincoln did not feel he could call out the Federal Army until Fort Sumter was attacked, which is why he ordered the commander at Fort Sumter to do exactly that thing which the South Carolinians had said would cause an attack. So if, in fact, the Iranians aren't going to compromise, it would be best if somebody else started the war. One can combine other means of pressure with sanctions. I mentioned that explosion on August 17th. We could step up the pressure. I mean, look, people, Iranian submarines periodically go down. Someday one of them might not come up. Who would know why? We can do a variety of things if we wish to increase the pressure. I'm not advocating that, but I'm just suggesting that this is not a either-or proposition of, you know, it's just sanctions has to succeed or other things. We are in the game of using covert means against the Iranians. We could get nastier at that.